some love and sunshine to you. So I have seen that we have come to 4 o'clock on the dot. And when I messaged people, I said, we're going to be starting at 4 no matter what. So I can't break the rules and not start the webinar. Otherwise, you'll be wrong. So today's webinar is about how to increase the success of your business with quality. And I'm your host, Ronald Cummings-John, and I'm also the co-founder of Global App Testing, which is a software quality solution for CTOs, senior software engineers, VPs, and we help people achieve as much of their digital success with quality as they would with the rest of their business, because we really believe that a business is affected by quality, and the more that we can help people improve the quality in their business, the faster their business will grow. And over the past few years, we have been very fortunate enough to meet and spend time with some incredible people in the quality industry and the engineering industry, meeting some of the top VPs of engineering, heads of quality in the world. And I think it was around probably just under 3 years ago, we ended up writing a book, or we started the process of writing a book called Leading Quality. And the book was launched in August and instantly became an Amazon bestseller. The core topic that we were discussing was, how do we as leaders inside our companies, how do we deliver high quality software and contribute towards the growth of our businesses? And over the years of us kind of going through this process and meeting all of the top VPs, etc., we ended up seeing that there was a similar framework of how top leaders began to look at quality and the effect that they could have inside their business, of the quality inside their business. And we call it the impact triangle. Now, the idea of an impact triangle is that there are different areas that we have to focus on when we are trying to lead inside our company. So the first core area is looking at customer impact. How do we make sure that the work that we are doing is having a positive effect for our customers? Because ultimately, it is our customers at the end of the day who are providing us with the revenue for our companies to grow. So we have to make sure that we are finding issues before our customers and just delighting our customers with the experience of the software that we have. The second area of impact is the idea of team impact. How do we as leaders help get the best out of our team? How do we structure our team? How do we support our team and grow our talent? And then lastly, we look at this idea of company impact, which is a little bit more broader. How do we look at the culture of quality inside our company, and from a more holistic level? How do we get everyone thinking about quality so that it doesn't just become a thing that, say, the quality department needs to look at, but is something that everybody is fully aware of? And these three things make up this idea of the impact triangle. And by focusing on all three of these, we really believe that people can have a more holistic view of their leadership as leaders in quality. Now, today, I want us to focus on team impact, because we want to see how can you start to move the needle as you look at making your team more efficient. And today we have a very special guest, probably one of my most exciting guests for me personally here today, because we have a gentleman called Vernon Richards. Now, Vernon Richards was actually the person that inspired us and pushed us to write the book and go through the whole process. And he introduced us to a lot of people behind the scenes as we were going through this process. And so, Vernon, I would love if you could give everyone just a little bit of an introduction, 30 seconds or so, about yourself, so people can just understand what you're up to right now.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name's Vernon. I've been testing since 2002. So what I specialize in is going and helping teams understand how to test more collaboratively in an agile context. And I've been doing that in all kinds of different industries and domains. Started off in video games, and then I've moved into things like e-commerce, websites, gambling machines, vending machines, even tested a Formula One car software at one point. So I've done that across startups, enterprise level organizations, so the whole nine. So I've seen a few things and experienced a few things, and like to share that with as many people as possible.
Awesome. So let's look at what we're going to be going through today. There's 4 key parts to this. The first part is we're going to look at what is the impact that quality has on business success, and can it even do it, right? The second bit we're going to look at is some tips about how your QA can help support your company's growth. And then we're going to go into a few giveaways and little surprises that we've got. And then finally, we're going to have some time for Q&A so we can have a chat. Now, I know that time is precious for everybody. So my aim is to make sure that we get this done in about 45 minutes or so. That's how long we've got on the clock. But if you have to jump off, if you've got work to do, if the baby starts crying and a big pandemic starts to happen in your house, we'll send you the recording. So just don't worry about that. So Vernon, are you ready for this webinar?
Ready. So ready.
Ready. Okay, cool. Let's go. Let's start with this question. Does quality really impact business success? And when I hear this question, a little image comes into my mind is that it's probably the question that somebody asked right before there was some IT disaster inside their company. You're like, do we even have to care about quality? No, we probably shouldn't. The next day, we've got an issue because we didn't look at quality, right? And a few examples of this happening. If we take, say, Provident Financials, which is a financial service company, they collect loans and give credit out as part of their day-to-day business. And they ended up having a bug in their loan collection application that meant they weren't collecting half of the loan debts in time. Now, they had to obviously announce this because they were a public company at the time, and their share price as a company dropped by 74%. Imagine that. Just imagine the pain that came from them not really focusing on quality. And the CEO obviously had to resign, and they kind of began to grow after that. But just that level of the effect that quality had on their business was very evident in that situation. Or if we even look more recently, only this month, another company ended up closing down, and the Royal Bank of Scotland had launched this new app, and it was called Bowbank. And they had to kill the application after 6 months. And the reason why they had to kill it was because they had rushed to launch it. They had so many different internal pressures that they were trying to deal with. And as they went to release the app, with obviously not having quality as a focus, they ended up just having 3 months of back and forth with customers, always trying to fix bugs, customer complaints, and their rating was terrible. And so not only did it stop them from having a good quality product, it literally killed that business. And if you can think the number of months and years that went into building that product, it's actually a real shame that kind of thing happens. And so there are many pressures that exist on people and on our teams. There are external pressures that come to us when we're trying to look at quality, where the number of devices and operating systems are always increasing as we start to enter new markets. The way that our application is used in different locations means we have to start thinking about so much more. There are time pressures that exist for us, which is, that constant push. So we got to release fast, we got to get this out. And then there's also all of the internal pressures that might happen where you're trying to manage this big release and you might not have the bandwidth inside to do it, or there might be internal politics happen. And so as leaders, we aim to help support our company and our teams, but we sometimes have different pressures on us. And so I would love to just quickly find out from the people who are on this call, just which pressures are impacting your team the most. Is it internal pressures, that lack of internal QA resources? Is it time pressures where you have to have this super quick release cycle happening? Or is it maybe external pressures? And we're going to have a vote coming up on your screen now. And if you just click on that, we can begin to see some of the answers. Vernon, I'm super interested. What out of these 3 affects you the most? Or have you seen just being the biggest pressure?
I was going to say all 3.
That is a nice scapegoat of an answer. I can't deny it. But if you have to choose one, Vernon, what would it be?
I think it's time pressure, because I think the other 2 feed into the time pressure thing. That's So it's time. I'd say it's time. Lack of time. Everything's important. Everything has to be done yesterday. So definitely time.
You know, it's kind of funny because I was looking at the live results as they came in, and internal pressures was actually at the top. As soon as you said time pressure, Vernon, people just started clicking on time pressure, and all of a sudden time pressure came in as one of the highest. So there you go. So there are these internal pressures where people don't have enough QA resources or they're stretched internally. And I think what you're saying is that's connected there to this time pressure of I don't have the time to do it all in, which is super interesting. And so with that, what is the question then comes, you know, how can we start to use our QA function, our quality side of our business to help our companies grow? And we're going to share, I think, 4 tips that Vernon has and I have thought through that I think might help people in their thinking around this. And the first one is really be customer centric. You know, if we look at our companies are driven by the people who use our products and services. And the more that we focus on those customers, the more that we will build something that helps grow the business. Now, there's a gentleman called Rob Meany, who's the author of the Team Guide to Software Testability. And he says, you know, human people are actually at the center of product development. And we need to start optimizing for those people's experiences as much as possible, giving them a voice, making sure that we're overcoming the problems that affect them the most. And if we can do that, then the natural effect is going to be that we're going to start to drive results, drive profit inside our business. And I think that really is incredibly true and definitely resonates with myself. And Vernon, I would love to understand, maybe from your viewpoint, you know, this whole idea of being customer centric. What are some of your thoughts or stories that you've seen about what happens when people are more customer centric or maybe less customer centric?
The one that springs to mind is when I worked at a Formula One company, and so we had the classic situation where you had a bug reported by the business, which in this case was the race engineers, to the development team. And the developers picked up this bug, tried to recreate it, couldn't recreate it. Said, "Van, I need to recreate this bug. I'm having problems." I couldn't recreate it either. And there was a little bit of frustration expressed that this happened a lot and we can't understand what's going on. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go and speak to the actual race engineer directly. So I went and got hold of this race engineer, and the first thing he started doing was just giving me so much context and insight into his world. So when we were trying to recreate the problem, we were using some crazy horsepower, state-of-the-art desktop in a nice, cool, calm office. When he was using the application, he's at the racetrack. It is hot. He's got the driver yelling in one ear. He's got the driver's race engineer yelling in another ear. He's got potentially a team principal yelling in both ears. It's just chaos and madness. And there are, you know, a ton of other teams are also trying to figure out and make some tweaks to their cars at the same time. And the nature of the problem was there was a simulation that was taking, I can't remember exactly, but let's say it was taking 10 seconds. And when we tried to reproduce it in the office, it took 10 and a half seconds, 11 seconds. And we were like, well, this is fine. And he was saying, no, every second counts. This is not acceptable. So it started off as a conversation just between me and him, but by the end of it, there were the whole of the development team was kind of around our desks or eavesdropping, listening to the conversation, because no one had that conversation with them before.
Right. And with that, was it like that happened instantly, right? So you went there, you're having this conversation, and all of a sudden the people around you and inside the team were having more of a customer-centric view, which is what we're trying to point out here, which is the thinking about things from the customer's perspective. It's quite interesting. Anthony made a point that, you know, being customer-centric can drive those time pressures. And I think that's when we look at the idea of being customer-centric as, you know, get something in front of the customer now. But I think what you're trying to, your story is kind of highlighting here is that the concept of being customer-centric is more related to thinking from the customer's perspective as we build. more than anything. I'd be interested to know, how did that change like over time? Because, you know, you're sitting there, there's this conversation happening. Now people understand it in that one instance. Did that affect how people worked down the line?
It wasn't a silver bullet. So I think there were of us in the team. But I definitely remember a couple of how there was a development team of around 10 or so people, and then we were divided up again into sub teams, if you like, depending on what application we were working on. And two of the team, which was one dev and one tester, they were working on I think it was a timing application, a lap timing application. They were already pretty close to the customer, and then they started to get even closer because they realized that the closer they were, the more information they could reveal and just build things more correctly, more relevantly out of the gate. And then I think the rest of the team, it did happen, but it happened over a longer amount of time. So it wasn't like instantaneous, just like that.
Right. And I think any change for anything or anyone, it's never really instant, is it? It's usually a thing over time. And I think that is our role as quality leaders, to continually remind our business and remind our teams about some of these things, because that's what allows us to get people to change their thinking. You know, if you just say it once, it's not going to work. I always remember that there's this saying that Steve Jobs, he told all of his execs that they're going to say something like 10,000 songs in your pocket. That was going to be the slogan for the iPod when they released the iPod. And he said to them, you're going to get so bored of saying that, but you need to keep on saying it, because people need to be reminded continually about these things. And I think this is another situation where we have to continually remind our teams about that desire to be customer centric as much as possible. And a few other quick thoughts around, you know, being customer centric is really making sure that you're giving your user a voice and listening to them. So that opportunity to hear what the user thinks and thinking from their persona and mapping out their experience, that's pretty much what your team ended up doing there. And this isn't always saying that you have to wait until the end of the whole process to do that, but what can you do during your process? Like, how can you as a leader in your team, or to get your team just more interested in that end customer journey and what they're doing, or speaking to those end customers in order to get insights and other ideas? And then if your app is being used in a different market or situation than the one that you're in, they're probably having a different experience. And that's what you highlighted there, Vernon. How, you know, you guys were sitting there and it was working for 10 seconds, which is perfectly fine. But the actual experience of the person who needed to use it, they were under a completely different pressure. And you can use things like crowdsource or crowd testing if you don't have the people with you who can give you access to local testers. They can give you that device operating system combination. And there's many other ways that you can be customer centric, even if you don't have access to all of your customers right in front of you. So that's that first tip. The second tip that we have here was about using a blend of manual and automated forms of testing in order to make sure that you are not having your team to one side lopsided. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, Vernon, because I know that you have many thoughts on the concept of manual and automated testing. And how do you look at that blend inside when you are joining a team or helping set up a team?
Well, it's not a case of either or. That's the thing. It really is about using that blend, and it's just about leveraging the two different ways of working in the most appropriate ways. So it's about as you're trying to figure out what to build and how to test it, there are going to be some risks and some behaviors and some information that you can predetermine, that you can think about ahead of time. And so that will lend itself more to scripts, whether they're automated or not. And some of those things are going to be more of a evaluate to a yes, no, pass, fail, true, false. And again, that would lend itself more to automation. But there's also some behavioral system that's much more emergent in nature, and you can't necessarily predict it ahead of time. And whenever you give an application to these pesky users, they always find some new way to operate the thing.
Vernon, we just talked about being customer centric. They're not pesky users. You can't use that term.
I said that totally with tongue in cheek. But yeah, they're going to do things with that you wouldn't necessarily have predicted, and so that's where using a more exploratory approach and using humans to do that can help. And then you can blend the two, because maybe there's some exploratory testing that you can't do as a human, and you need a tool to assist you to do that. So it's about mixing up all those different approaches and ways of doing things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if I take, Dan Ashby, who was the head of testing over at eBay, he said a very similar thing. He was like, there are activities that you got to do that are checking things and verifying things. But once you've even checked it, you need to investigate into it to understand what's really happening. And that's where you're going to need a more exploratory approach again. So there's always this blend between the two. And when it comes to thinking about what to automate, hey, make sure you're automating those repetitive tasks as much as possible. Find the quick automation wins that have as much of a big impact as possible. But, obviously, don't forget that human touch and exploratory testing is going to be key to make sure that you are focusing on the thing that's going to affect that customer that we were talking about earlier, because that's really, again, what's going to drive that growth. Always having to focus on that customer's experience, and that customer usually is a human, unless your product is an API to an API, but then I'm sure someone's using the API, so there still needs to be a level of thinking it through for the human, right? The third tip that we have here is test early and test often. And this is about making sure that you're having more of a continuous testing approach when you look at your QA strategy. And when we talk about this whole idea of testing early and testing often, sometimes you get asked, where can you test? Like, where should you test? And the answer to that is everywhere. There is every part of the process, from when you begin the planning to when you are designing to when you release stuff, can all be tested in some way and all has an element to quality. And I'd love to get your views on this idea of testing early and testing often. How do you look at that, Vern?
Well, let me reverse the question and fire it back at you. So, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
Man, it was a quickie. So I just had toast. It wasn't too exciting, unfortunately.
Okay, so if you imagine your process for toast. Mm-hmm. What point did you know that you had some tasty piece of toast?
I mean, when I was eating it, obviously.
Right. So here's the thing: if you think about your process of making toast, you'll realize that there are some things that need to happen along the way that will impact the outcome at the end. So if you were to make the toast with moldy bread, you probably would not have a great time when the toast was done. Or if your kids or nieces or nephews had made a bit of toast a few minutes before, and it got this is something that really bothers me. You get the butter or the marge, and it gets mixed up with the jam. That's not acceptable. So the point I'm trying to make is there are lots of things that can happen that you can be aware of and that you can take note of and keep an eye open for before the end. Now, testers typically work depending on the methodology that they're using. They typically need a product to work with, but those skills can be applied throughout that process. So I think this is what Dan is trying to describe here. Is like if you just visualize all the steps and say to yourself, well, what happens at the planning stage that impacts the outcome at the end? Oh, so why don't we just start testing there and see how we can make that better? So yeah.
I've never thought about that, and I think when I make toast tomorrow morning, it's going to be a very different experience. I'm going to be there checking early and often, and checking every part of the process as I move along. We'll see. Okay. So making this concept of continuous testing, making it part of your QA strategy, it's really going to help you, right? Because as you start to think about things from a more continuous perspective, you actually end up shortening that iteration loop. Because if you have addressed some of these situations earlier on in the process, then not as many issues actually end up deriving as you move towards the end, right? And this reduces the number of issues that hit in production and helps increase the quality of your application. The final tip that we were going to share today was about implementing a scalable approach to the way that you look at quality and testing inside your company. And I think the core thing here is that once your product begins to scale, and by scale, we're talking here getting more users, more customers onto your product, you actually need to consider how your testing approach will need to adjust or slightly change. And this is something that we see quite a lot internally at Gap, because we hear a lot of people say, now's not the right time for us to be working with you. We don't think that's a good fit. And then you could fast forward, say 6 months down the line, and their product's more mature, or they have that issue that we mentioned earlier, where people don't have enough QA resources because they're increasing, but they haven't increased the headcount, right? So they're then they come back to us and they say, hey, let's have a chat. Let's talk about how we might be able to work together. So your situation is continually changing as your product scales, and you have to make sure that the way that you look at quality and your product is also adjusting alongside adjusting. And one of the reasons why I think this happens quite a bit is actually coming back to those features that we were talking about earlier. So as you are doing that scaling process, there's more external pressures, right? Because by now you end up having more devices that you have to work with. You have more locations potentially that you're on. There's also the internal pressures start to increase, where as you're scaling, you might not have that team head size that I was talking about earlier. So those are the thoughts that really run through my mind around scaling. How do you look at this from your perspective, Bert?
It's pretty much what you said. It's all around the context. The context is kind of king. So I worked at an organisation that before I got there, they were a startup, and they sold tickets to music events based on your musical preferences. And when they started off, they had a particular, let's just for argument's sake say they had one team and one tester. But then over the course of time, as they became more popular and had more users, the team started to scale up, and these added more features and work on different parts of the application. But they still only had a single tester. So what she quickly realized is that she was becoming the bottleneck. So she stopped being the person who would do all of the testing, and they moved to a more CI/CD approach, which meant that the code could just go from a developer's machine straight out to production. And what she started to do was to kind of become almost like a coach to the dev teams. Kind of say, okay, I'm going to work with you to help identify what we should test, and then she would help them test that. And
so in that situation, as they grew, they began to relook at their approach of everything, right? And then their needs started to change as that growth happened. Definitely true. And there are many different ways to look at that scaling. You can increase the type of testing that you're doing. At one point, I've only done exploratory testing, and then you now need to start looking at it from a more localized perspective, or performance testing might come into play. But the thought that always runs through my mind is that don't let having just a small workforce or a small team get in your way. There's always other ways to look at supporting your team, whether that's through people like you, like consultancies like yourself, or like crowd testing companies like ours, of just supporting and bolstering the team in a more flexible way to move forward. And so I want to quickly recap, right? I want to take us back to where we had started. So as a leader, we are always looking for ways to get the best out of our teams. And the better our team perform, the more we can focus on making sure that we're doing the type of activities that grow our company, which is pretty much the 4 areas that we just talked about. So this idea of being customer centric, making sure that we're developing with that end user in mind. And even when we're looking at things from maybe a test team, they are really attuned to getting information from potential or close to customers. Using a blend of automated and automated tasks as much as possible. Testing early and often, looking for where else can we test in this process in an earlier part in order to potentially find issues before they crop up later on. And then lastly, making sure that we are implementing a scalable approach and adjusting as we grow and adapt in our as our product is developing. Now, that doesn't take away the fact that there are still pressures that exist, right? We talked about them earlier, the external pressures, the internal pressures. And these pressures are really the things that prevent our teams from being able to spend their time doing all these things that we want them to do. And so I just want to quickly share with the audience and also yourself, Vernon, just some of the things that we look at inside Global App Testing when we are partnering with companies around these pressures. So firstly is this idea of external pressures. We have localized testers around the world, just over 40,000 of them. And that allows us to test pretty much any device, any operating system in any location. And that allows you to not have so much of that external pressure of what's going on, how is my application being used by someone externally. Because we can simulate, and not even simulate, actually are in the real world environments that are probably close to what your customer is experiencing. The second area is this concept of internal pressures. And again, if you don't have that bandwidth internally to get everything done, we can help scale up and down for our customers by giving them that additional testing resource. And then finally, that whole idea of time pressure, we do different forms of testing. And some of that testing, we can return results in back in an hour. And on the most longer exploratory tests, we can anywhere. So there are many different things that you can do when you partner with us to alleviate a lot of these pressures. Now, when we were on the last webinar, we actually did something that we had never done before, and we gave away 5 free trials to work with us so that people could get an opportunity to see what it was like to work with us as a company. And basically, people signed up so fast for it that those trials went pretty quickly. And so we said to ourselves, let's do it again. Let's give the people that are spending their time coming to listen to us an opportunity to work with us without having to deal with the pressures of getting internal budgets and all the other things that they might have to do. So we have 5 free trials that we are offering to the listeners of this webinar, which are worth about $5,000 each. And the only thing that you have to do is I'm going to give you a link very shortly. And when you go to that link, it allows you to book a call with one of our quality experts. And as you book that call, you'll have a chance to chat to them about what you're currently doing. If you wanted a copy of the book or something like that, they'll be able to help you with that and give that to you. But this is just an opportunity for someone that if they were sitting thinking, maybe this could be for me, we thought we'd do it. So just a quick example of a recent customer that did a trial with us. They were like, even if Get had only found 10 issues, we would have thought it was great, but we just found so much more. So there's so much value that we think we can provide people, and we're looking forward to sharing that with people. And obviously, these aren't the only people that have said great things about us. We hear it from pretty much all of our customers. So if you were interested in having a chat with us about the work that we do, how we might be able to support you, if you scan this code that is on your screen right now with your phone, then you'll be taken to a page. The only thing that you have to do in order to register for that trial, in order to get access to it, is just to book a meeting with one of our team, and you'll be eligible for that. Now that's only going on for the next 48 hours, so that this link will basically close in 48 hours from this time now. So this should be closed, I think, 5 p.m. on Friday. Or you can go to lqbook.co/trial. The other question that we sometimes get asked when we did this last time is, is this right for me? Is this right for my team? Is this what my company needs right now? And really, it's just an opportunity that if you're currently having more releases than you used to, now could be a time to get that additional support. If you don't have the resources internally, you've got headcount freezes and other bits and bobs like that, now's probably a good time. If you're unsure if what we do could fit you, it's worth the chat, because it's there's no barriers here anymore. And if you're using someone else and you just want to see, hey, could we be a better fit? That's pretty much why we did this. So that's for 5 people, 48 hours, if you go to that link there. So as we're coming towards the time that I promised people we would have, I thought I would leave 5-10 minutes for a little bit of Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them inside the chat box, and Vernon and myself can answer some of those. And I can see that Vitor is asking a question coming up. And as those questions are coming in, Vernon, I'm super interested, as you think about the experiences that you've had, working with different companies, what has been, when you enter a new company, what would you say is the biggest thing that blocks driving success of quality in the business?
I would say it's a lack of a clear quality narrative, or no one's really identified what is that single unifying measure that everybody can use to orient themselves to decide whether they're doing the right thing. So I was talking about this with a friend of mine today, and he reminded me that when NASA were trying to put somebody on the moon, everybody that worked there, if you'd asked them whether they were a cleaner or whether they were literally a rocket scientist, what do you do? I work at NASA and we're trying to put somebody on the moon. And it's that kind of clear, I work at X and we're trying to do this. I work at Apple and we're trying to put 10,000 songs in your pocket. That's what we're trying to do.
Right.
And once you know that, you can orient every action that you take. Is this going to help me put these songs in this person's pocket or not?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's going to make that more or less likely? So I think that's the biggest problem for me. So people don't understand what that is.
So we've had some questions come in here. I'm going to start off with one from Vitor. Regarding those 3 Ps, I see that it's quite hard to convince decision makers about investing time into quality. What would you recommend towards convincing them that QA is a must for growth? Now, Vernon, I know that you have been in many situations where you've gone into a company and they weren't focusing too much on quality. You've questioned them a little bit and you've got them rethinking about it. So I'd love to hear your opinions on that question.
Well, I think basically we need to get out of our own way. It's kind of related to what I was just talking about. We need to understand how they see the work, like what do they value? Because once you understand what they value, we can frame what we do in terms of their values.
Yeah.
So if you think of a non-software example, it's Ramadan right now, and I'm fasting. I'm Muslim, right? There are certain kinds of foods and drinks that I can and I can't eat. So if you tell me that we're going to go and have the best bacon butties that London has ever seen, that's not really going to get me interested. But if you say, "Oh, Vern, they all," if you know that I don't eat bacon, and this place also serves an amazing chickpea curry or something, I don't know, you can say, "Hey, Vern, this place does an amazing chickpea curry," and I'll be like, "Wow, I'm excited. Let's go." So in a software context, it needs to be the kind of same thing. It's kind of say, "Well, why don't you care? What do you care about?" So instead of trying to convince them to care about testing, try and find out what they care about, and then frame your testing ideas in terms of what they care about. I hope that makes sense.
That does make sense. If I look at even the way that we talk about this presentation and everything that we're talking about in this webinar, it is very much saying when you're looking at quality, don't talk about it in the sense of testing. Talk about it in the sense of how it can impact the business, the way the business is going and its growth. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And interestingly enough, I think one of the first thing that sometimes people have to look at is, are they even aware of that information themselves? If you spend all of your time focused on things from a quality perspective, you need to make sure you also look at the business perspective. Now, I think as roles that are more VP director led in the quality space, this is pretty much their daily battle. Like they now understand both sides of that, and they're starting to look at how do they combat that inside the business as much as possible. But I think if you are looking at other decision makers and you're wondering why they don't care, as you just said, Vernon, the first step is understanding what they care about, and then seeing how can you connect what you're doing to what they care about, and see how that changes.
exactly.
We have another question here from Sid. Can you advise whether there is a quality standard for software testing? Do you think there's a quality standard for software testing, Vern?
There are people that are trying or have tried. They haven't really succeeded as. It's difficult because quality is kind of relative. But okay, so there are kind of industries and domains and situations where, yes, certain things have to be mandated. So I've worked in the medical space, in the clinical trial software space, and you'll be audited. So you need to show very strong paper trails around. Did you check this? Why are you doing this piece of work, etc., etc. So in those situations where you have an external outside authority, that can impact the work. But in terms of software developers, software engineers, testers, quality people, having some kind of code of practice, that doesn't exist yet. Or if it does, I don't know about it.
And it will always evolve, right? Because I like to think that, we are mostly in cutting edge companies as much as, everyone wants to be in a cutting edge related environment. And as you are in the cutting edge, you have to always develop new ways of looking at and testing things. How do you truly test AI? How do you truly test ML? These are new questions that people now need to start looking at as they move forward. Just looking at the time, I want to ask one last question of you, Vernon, and it was related to what you were just talking about. And the question is from Farm. It says, what have you done to help internal teams that you've been a part of build more of a narrative, a unifying message, or a North Star metric, the stuff you were just alluding to, just sharing some of your experience of having done that?
Well, it kind of starts by talking, to be honest. So you've kind of got to go and find out who are your stakeholders, and what do they care about, and really try and spend some actual time with them, sit with them while they're doing their job. If you can do things like that, like understand what the CFO reports on back to the markets on. Okay, we've had a good quarter because blah blah. Let's try to understand those kind of things. Go and speak to your customer success, customer support, tech support teams, because they are the people that are speaking directly with your customers, and they will have a really good insight into what your customers care about. And then once you've gathered that kind of intel, then you can start looking at your approach to quality across your development lifecycle and say, well, our customers care about this, our other internal business stakeholders care about that. Are we supporting that goal or not? And that can be quite an eye-opening kind of conversation process.
Yeah, I really like that. It's really, coming back to that, really understanding the people around you. And I like that you're like, hey, understand the people inside your company and understand the customer. Like it's all part of creating that story, because maybe if the people inside the company don't care, the better you understand the customer, the more you can relay the effect to the customer, which then has a bit more of an effect on the people inside. And so I'm going to wrap up for questions there. And I just want to quickly share some details with everyone. So if you want to connect with myself or Vernon, feel free to tweet us. My handle is RonaldCJ, and Vernon's is Tester from LEIC, which is short for Leicester. And you're a big Twitter fan, so I'm sure you'll be responding on there if anyone wants to chat, right?
Yes, indeed.
Awesome. And I think the final thing is just quickly, if you have any feedback on this webinar, we would love to know if you could put it inside the chat room, what you liked, what you didn't, what could be improved. And this way we can keep iterating on making sure we're giving as much value to everyone on this webinar as possible. So other than that, I hope that everybody has a safe rest of their week. And I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which is going to be with some of the team from Deloitte, which I'm pretty excited about. So speak to you all soon. And until then, stay safe. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.